All right, we've got a healthy bunch of attendees rolling in, so we're going to go ahead and get kicked off now so we can really maximize the rest of the hour. For everyone who's here already and those hopping on still, thank you for joining our Joyride webinar series on pricing strategies, where we're going to hopefully have a robust conversation around kind of various topics, kind of centered around pricing that can kind of drive profit in shared micromobility. My name is Andrew Miles. For those that don't know me, I'm the head of partnerships at Joyride. I've got an extensive background prior to Joyride in operations, and love everything there is to have with shared micromobility and all the modalities that we have around the world right now. I'm going to kick it over to my kind of friends today on our webinar, Charles Farr from Zoba and Lars Christian Grodum Olsen from Movability. I'll let you guys do a quick little intro. Charles, if you want to start.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Andrew. My name is Charles Farr. I'm a product manager here at Zoba. Zoba is a platform that does demand forecasting and then operational optimization for micromobility and shared mobility operators across the globe. We really focus on, again, understanding how vehicles move through cities where there is kind of latent and underlying demand, likely untapped, working with operators to go out and capture that demand. And yeah, very excited to be chatting today about pricing, a topic we certainly get a lot of questions about.
Thanks for being here, Charles. Lars?
Thanks for having me here, Andrew. I work as a mobility consultant for public and private clients, and I'm the managing director of Movability. Our thesis is basically that new mobility will take a similar turn to public transit and end up being embraced by the public and eventually subsidized. So we want to bring the knowledge that facilitates that process. And kind of my claim to fame here is that I started Tier Mobility's Norwegian branch and scaled it from 200 to 8,000 scooters and from 1 to 150 employees.
Awesome. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining today. Let's dive right in. We're coming up right now on the 6-year anniversary of when Bird dropped the first real shared scooters in Santa Monica back in late 2017. And back then, and still to this day, the notion of pricing was this unlock fee. At the time, it was $1 to unlock, and in many cases still is. And then a pricing per minute thereafter. And the idea was that $1 would theoretically cover the cost of goods sold for the operator, and that the utilization thereafter is going to juice your profit. Well, we've seen that hasn't really worked out as kind of originally planned, and that kind of very nice, seamless kind of pitch. As most things are, they don't always go according to plan. But I kind of like to throw it to you, Charles. Where do you think, or what do you think kind of went wrong with that kind of strategy, or what things actually have gone right with that? And kind of is this something that we are not really looking at from a industry standard as blanketly kind of meeting the entire customer price pool? Take from there.
Yeah, certainly. So I think looking at the kind of standard unlock per and plus per minute fees, I don't know if you can take any huge exception with the pricing approach right off the bat. I think that there are certainly other options out there. You can think about passes and subscriptions, subsidized, free access programs, things of that nature. There's a lot of different options. But I think at the time scooters hit the road in Santa Monica, the per minute plus a utilization, or the unlock plus a per minute fee seemed probably quite sensible. What I think we have realized since is that like the underlying unit economic model to run a successful shared mobility service likely looks different than what Bird and other early operators laid out. So what I mean by that is that we've seen that the general blitzscaling approach with permitless operations and open markets tends to pretty quickly drive per vehicle utilization really low, which is ultimately bad for operators, tends to be bad for actual riders and municipal citizens, and governments don't like the outcomes associated with those scenarios. So coupling that with the fact that it is really important to actively manage your fleets, and I think the reality is that pricing should support profitability first and foremost is kind of the goal, right? So again, at the outset, I don't know if there are any other great proxies for how to price micromobility service, as compared to Uber at the outset, but there's obviously a lot of differences there. So again, I think what we've seen is it is critical to deliver a high quality service, right? Putting vehicles in the right places to ensure they're charged and well maintained. And doing so tends to be more intensive than probably early operators anticipated, and maybe some of the early business models really supported. And as a result, it can be tough to run profitable operations with the pricing as it debuted, way back when. And I think we'll touch a bit more on this today. But again, pricing is probably an important mechanism to shape an operator's relationship with riders, as well as potentially with city partners. But ultimately, I think it's often second to running a tight operation that's going to help you capture the ridership in your market.
That's a good point. I mean, when Bird launched, it was very focused on this gig economy and kind of using what they call them bird catchers, and I think Lime called them juicers. Very very catchy names. And yeah, so we've seen a transition kind of across the industry from that kind of gig worker model more towards an overall adopted model of in-house staff and localized operations. Correct me if I'm wrong, it was about a year and a half, maybe a little bit after that Tier started to really scale quite big across Europe, Lars. And your time back then as an early employee, and as you just mentioned, launching all over the Nordics. Would you agree with kind of Charles's assessment there that that there are some downsides to kind of the blitz scaling model and kind of the implications that you're forced to take with operations? And if so, like, would there be anything you may do different if you could like go back in time knowing what you know now and start over?
Yeah, I think I'm not gonna speak on behalf of Tier, but for my part, I think generally operators love the unlock plus minute fee pricing model because it kind of gives you the chance to actually price the use of electricity. And I mean, maybe you can consider like a pure minute model, but a lot of operators use the unlock to kind of capture margin and also to lock in like more power users. But I think if I could have spoken to myself in 2019, I think I would have said like relax when competitors are making like aggressive pricing. Because I mean, we saw one pricing model which was like the unlimited package, which was like hugely unprofitable. I think it had like a loss of $200 per pass. I saw one kind of like one operator I interviewed told me that was one number they were operating with or saw in their research. So like I think ultimately it's not that much about pricing. It's more about and even though customers nag a lot about pricing and are really preoccupied with it, it's more about they want to get from A to B efficiently, speedily, and somewhat cheaply. But efficiently is really the kind of priority for them. And if like for me as a user, I don't really care if I have to reach an appointment and I'm late. I don't care if I have to pay $4 or $6. I just want to get there in time, and I want to do it in a frictionless way. And in public transport, it's the same thing. Customers complain about prices, but ultimately pricing is not going to matter in making it a valid option if it doesn't really take you from A to B efficiently. So yeah, I think I would have told myself to really focus on power users.
Well, that's interesting what you brought up about the user journey, about the efficiency. And I think right now we're kind of talking about it in the historical sense of scooters, but The kind of modern day, and modern day 6 years later, is that we have a very multimodal landscape. Operators aren't just running scooters or aren't just running bikes or e-bikes. They're running all three, or even adding e-mopeds in there. And it's really trying to fit the user demographics in their locale. And so I'd say for a lot of users and operators maybe wanting to start now or wanting to expand, they are looking to go multimodal rather than just scaling their existing scooter fleet or existing e-bike fleet. So thinking in the guise of a user, do you recommend, and I'll throw this to both of you, do you recommend that we price, or someone should price e-bikes the same as scooters or the same as mopeds? Or should we view this as more of a very specific price elasticity between the modalities?
Yeah, I think I can take that one. I mean, e-bikes and e-mopeds have been kind of like a darling for some operators, at least until they find out kind of the operational costs and difficulties with it. And cities love e-bikes, and a lot of users love them as well. But I mean, in that kind of in I think it's kind of a counterintuitive, because if you look at the P&L, e-bikes are more expensive and they have less demand. So they should kind of be, and they bring you to from A to B quicker, actually. So they should be priced more expensively. But e-scooters tend to win in terms of how consumers view simplicity. It's just easier to hop on an e-scooter than e-bikes. So, and in Norway, there's actually a public transit authority that subsidizes e-bikes. So they have a great e-bike too. And they subsidize it to a point where users use it more than the e-scooter. So I think kind of it can be a bit of a counterintuitive thing. I think that cities could find out that if this is something that we really want, we should actually create a viable option, not just something like an add-on that helps an operator win tender.
Yeah, I just jumping in on that, Lars. Agree really with all of those points. I think from our side, what we've seen is that the Venn diagram of kind of demand for scooter versus e-bikes is probably, there's pretty significant overlap, in the sense that oftentimes, again, right, just as a rider, you're looking for convenience. If you go outside and you have the option, you may choose one or the other that might be a bit better suited to your personal taste or to your trip. But if you only have one, you're likely to take that vehicle, right? So if there's only an e-bike, nothing's going to stop me or many users from using the e-bike. Versus if similar service has a scooter, hopping on a scooter and taking it for your trip. I think there are certainly differences, kind of at the margins, right? So some users may be more comfortable on a bike. It's a form factor that many more are used to. Obviously, stand-up, sit-down models, a e-bike is seated, as are some of the other, sit-down e-scooters. I think that some of those small decisions factor into it, but I think convenience and efficiency is really the driving factor in a user, determining if they want to take a ride. As far as the operational point of view, I do think that it is important to understand how those profiles of modalities might differ when you do think about pricing. Kind of completely agree with Lars. E-bikes tend to, but they often are faster, right? And we see that they often cover more ground and can service a slightly kind of different ride profile. So oftentimes longer rides. And these longer rides can result in vehicles kind of moving further afield, right? Ultimately, that results in higher service costs if you have to cover more ground to, maintain your fleet. And then there's just the physical reality that e-bikes are larger and heavier, and then therefore much more difficult to relocate. And that's taxing for any operator in the field who actually has to go out and move the vehicles and relocate the fleet, but also it precludes you from doing probably some larger number of scooter relocations. I think that, the kind of per intervention service costs for an e-bike certainly higher. But I think we also see again that oftentimes there's larger batteries on e-bikes. Oftentimes they have a little bit fewer trips per day in total. and then maybe a little bit lower velocity of service. So, with while costs can be higher, the total number of interventions you need can be lower. I think there's the potential that in many markets the difference washes out a bit, but it's important to understand how some of those kind of ride and usage profiles differ as you think about pricing. Because if there is a real divergence, I think pricing them accordingly is going to benefit you and allow you to support the operations you need to really then deliver a great e-bike program and a great scooter program, instead of one kind of coming at the sacrifice of the other.
Charles, what do you mean by higher velocity?
Yeah, I guess we were talking about this earlier, probably just lower trips per vehicle per day. And then with a little bit larger batteries, or even same size batteries, right? Batteries tend to last a lot longer now. You're not going to need to service them as often. So just service costs are higher, but you don't need to do it as often. So when you look at it over time on a total P&L basis, the actual cost of servicing one fleet versus the other have the potential to wash out across the two different modes, two different modalities. That's not always the case, but it can be depending on rider profiles, right, in your market.
So I think you both brought up interesting points there on, Lars, you kind of mentioned that the kind of weird dichotomy that e-bikes can be extremely popular, but from an operational standpoint, they also cost a lot more, both upfront and on the daily or weekly operational
They're bigger.
overhead. So I'm wondering if you think that is it really for new operators or anyone that might be looking to go multimodal, is kind of that risk reward of, hey, it's going to cost a little bit more to buy this fleet. Is it worth it in the long run? Does it balance out over time, or maybe even actually be more profitable than scooters? And then kind of Charles, you kind of mentioned the kind of that you will have some different kind of user cases between these. Do you think that the maybe lower interactions and kind of more expensive OpEx, yet lower OpEx interaction needs kind of over time actually maybe lends to a justification for multimodal in maturing markets?
Was that for me or Charles?
Well, you first, Lars, on kind of on if it's worth
Okay.
it, and then Charles on
Okay,
kind
no
of the
worries.
prices.
Well, I mean, I'm a simple Norwegian guy who, at the end of the day, if I was an operator, I would be caring about profit, for the most part, and basically be using the e-bike as a kind of like tender winning tool, to be completely honest. I mean, because at the end of the day, that's what brings in the moolah. But that being said, like I love riding e-bikes, especially the Lion bike and the bike that this PTA and this Norwegian city has. But there aren't that many good off-the-shelf e-bikes, to be honest. So it's a high risk venture.
Okay.
I think I will defer to Lars on the operational expertise and then actually being in the field on it. I think I agree that e-bikes can serve a really strong kind of purpose in building out a holistic program. I think that's often what cities care about when they're looking for e-bikes and tenders. From a ridership profile, we don't see, again, it's kind of the differences are on the margin. So e-bikes certainly add and support some additional trip types that maybe just a standard scooter fleet wouldn't. Again, the value of that, I think, is going to depend in a really dense city where trips tend to be shorter on average. The appetite for e-bikes probably lower than in
Yeah.
a city that's a little bit more spread out, has more ground to cover, potentially hillier. I live in Seattle. The line e-bikes do a great job zooming up hills where scooters will struggle at times. So I think there's some nuance in the decision, but I think that ultimately, right, profitability is key, and then just thinking about what it's actually going to add to your service offering to customers, and then how you use that within a tender. Because I don't think that e-bikes are necessary in every market to add. I think that oftentimes you can probably get away with, if you have capital to spend on additional vehicles, additional scooters will oftentimes be able to service the same demand that an e-bike fleet might be able to.
Yeah.
Okay, good points.
I'll support that. I think like ultimately it's a city issue and not an operator. Like, I mean, I think, and I think it should be a city issue. I think like cities and kind of like governments need to find out. We need to do more research on finding out kind of what is the value of an e-bike ride versus an e-scooter ride, and find like legitimate grounds for saying, okay, we're willing to actually put down some cash for getting e-bike ops. And when that's happened, then I mean, then you can buy a fleet of, yeah, an e-bike. But yeah, it's difficult to design an e-bike. I think if you talk to like any of the big European players, they have so many e-bike projects that they just canceled, and the big OEMs that have the standard models, they are really not that good after 1 to 2 years. So yeah, that's
Let's
the
we've kind of touched upon some city aspects and how that's influential. Let's kind of pivot there a little bit and kind of look at this from the kind of municipal side. In my opinion, it's almost been viewed as an unpleasant, aspect of this industry behind the scenes. Least public sharing side, not necessarily a private share, but on the public sharing side, there's been a lot of, as you just kind of mentioned, a lot of operators acquiescing to certain things in tenders or RFPs because they want to be in the market and they think they can mature in the market and then maybe change regulation. Whether that's ever realized or not, or as you just mentioned, Lars, people pull out for various reasons. But one of the key aspects that I never really agreed with was in my time as an operator was permit fees or rev shares that were mandated as part of these public sharing operations, because that and in the end adds cost to the operation, which forces price increases, which does not benefit the customer, in my opinion. So kind of looking at that, Lars, do you think there will be, the current state of regulatory measures are going to kind of continue? And if so, do you think these are going to continue to have a really lasting impact on actual demand, or maybe even the slowing of adoption of this kind of industry because of that kind of demand? And should operators really, jack up prices to make sure they remain profitable? And how do you view that big operators or even small operators handle city operations like that?
It's a great question. I mean, ultimately, the city kind of like revenue share and permit fees, they have the only function that they have is kind of putting the cost of the city operations onto the service. That's the kind of like one function that they have. Um, and I mean, there are other ways of kind of that have a more direct effect on the operations and kind of like tidiness, like parking fines. I mean, I don't know if you have that functionality in Joyride yet, but maybe it'll come one day. But I mean, ultimately, like as an operator, it's all about becoming profitable in the markets that you are in, and permit fees or whatever other regulation costs like insurance fees, parking fines, or whatever else, it adds to the P&L, it adds costs to the P&L. It has a concrete, tangible cost that means that you need to up your prices to be able to be profitable. There's no way around it. So yeah.
Strategically there, do you take that price increase and turn that back to the cities and use that as a justification to maybe reduce or eliminate that? And a lot of Joyride customers operate in mid-sized cities. I mean, there's only so many 5 million population city centers across the globe, and
Yeah.
and your former employer and the Limes of the world are the ones that are going to continue to have that.
Yeah.
But for everyone else, a lot of these cities are they're administratively regulated by like one or two people. So it's not
Yeah.
like this huge bureaucracy. So there can be more personal relationships. How do you advise like smaller operators to say, hey, this is how you should interact and kind of justify, future changes to market regulations?
I think that's a really, really good question. And what I've often told operators is if you want to earn the trust of a city official, you need to gain their trust like by being transparent. So, I mean, I've recommended to several to basically open up their books because, I mean, ultimately cities want operators to be profitable. And if you can show that like the effect on the P&L that a certain fee or a revenue share model is having, and that really puts you in the red, then that's a really powerful tool. And I mean, that's probably a bit un-American, but that's where I come with my Norwegianness and kind of bring out the guitar and sing songs at the bonfire and say, "Can't we all be friends?"
Well, kind of taking it from the raw data side and looking at just the numbers, assuming that some of these costs you're not going to be able to change, and that you will have these indirect costs that are not market driven, they're regulatory, or even say like random anecdotal insurance costs that are kind of pulled out of thin air by insurers. Charles, do you, in kind of the data that you see at Zoba, do you see operators really changing up pricing to account for these and that actual price changes having impactful demand, plus or minus? Do you see that really holding back certain markets or even pushing it forward?
Yeah, certainly. Thinking about the impact these prices have on demand, or these fees have on prices, and then in turn demand. Um, it's an important, kind of area to look at. I think what we've seen is that at least where prices are today, again, it kind of goes back to the convenience, and I think it's a different of magnitude, right? I think as far as demand for services go, it doesn't suffer too much with some of the small price increases that we've seen. I think ridership has really stayed quite high after recovering. Globally, even with some kind of more recent price increases. So I think the sense that there's a dedicated user base now that really enjoys the service and is willing to pay for it is kind of a new reality. But I think again, doubling prices might have a different effect than a 10 to 15% increase. Broadly, I did just want to echo to like what Lars was saying. I do think that the illustrating the trade-off with cities around the impact these prices have can be really really beneficial. I think that there's the argument that you want to be profitable. I mean, that's a no-brainer, right? But there are different ways to be profitable, right? You can work to cut your own costs pretty aggressively. You can try and drive demand pretty aggressively and drive more revenue. And at least at Zoba, the best way we've seen consistently to actually capture more demand is making sure that your fleet is positioned to capture it, right? We talked about the convenience that users see, that kind of drives user behavior. It's often, is there a vehicle where I need it and when I need it? And if there's not, obviously no ride can happen, but there's a lot of potential loss to that. I think that you see that kind of the more cost-conscious operational approaches tend to prioritize already heavily supplied areas. So it's quite cheap to jump a lot of vehicles into a downtown area. Some of them will get rides. Total volume of rides will be high in that area, but there's often a lot of kind of stranded assets in the sense of just vehicles that aren't actually contributing very much. And even if they are getting rides, they're probably taking rides from their neighbors. Those vehicles could serve really, really, really important roles in what you might call a little bit lower demand areas. And oftentimes those lower demand areas feed into the high demand areas. And if the revenue fees or other governmental fees charged by the city, permit fees, whatever have you, are impacting your ability to invest a little bit more in operations, you're not going to be able to deliver as good of a service to riders and therefore the municipalities you're working in as you otherwise might be able to be. So that might not look necessarily like opening up just your accounting to cities, but also just talking about data, talking about ridership patterns, things of that nature to really illustrate that, hey, I would love to be servicing this little bit more outlying neighborhood, but the simple fact of the matter is it's more expensive for me to do it, and having to make up revenue that I'm paying out to cities and fees and whatnot is limiting me from doing that. So I do think that there's a lot of potential for continued collaboration, and again, pricing is kind of a lever to drive that conversation. It's one of them, as well as the kind of sharing some operational costs and potentially even data on how vehicles are moving through the market and what ridership demand looks like. So again, pricing is probably not going to be the thing that changes the demand profile meaningfully. It really is, again, are vehicles in the right places at the right times for your users to ride, which sounds simple, but I think can be very difficult when you're dealing with all the dynamics of a city and a kind of 24/7 operations.
Well, let's actually keep it there and kind of pull back the curtain a little bit on kind of how you can operationally simplify. When you kind of boil all those factors down, Lars, from a market operator perspective, what kind of levers, as like a market manager, operationally, do you think, if kind of a top three or top two, what do you think have the biggest impact on an operator's bottom line, that you can actually, actionably take within a market?
I love that question. I mean, I think it goes back to what you kind of initially asked me, like, what would I tell myself in 2019 that I knew now? And I think, like, generally also for like seeing some Joyride customers kind of spray and pray, kind of like having several cities with less assets. I think, like, if you kind of structure the P&L and put out the business case of it and see the operational efficiencies of how kind of utilization works in tandem with pricing and operational efficiency, you see you want to be in just like one city with 800 scooters rather than like 8 cities with 100 scooters each, even if you kind of get a high utilization rate in kind of like 2 or 3 of those cities. You really want to double down on one city, focus all your energy on that, and really win those power users there. And I think, as to Charles's point, where kind of Zoba can help, rebalancing is just really important to users. Also, can kind of enabling habits and continuity. Kind of, if you can establish where users are taking daily rides or like commuting rides, like several days a week, you can kind of help build those habits into becoming something more tangible and consistent, rather than just kind of the users needing to always like see, is there a scooter here or not, than to just knowing there's always going to be a scooter here on that corner. And for a power user, that's just value for everything. But I think, like, generally speaking to the power users, is I think you can learn a whole lot from just really interacting with them, winning them over, and ultimately finding out how you can make them profitable. Because I mean, they'll talk a lot about price, but they'll also talk a lot about the service. And I think that's where ultimately you need to put in your priority, but you need to win them over a bit with price first to kind of get them talking. But
How
yeah,
would you actually say you go about getting that feedback? What mechanisms I mean, it's kind of like Malcolm Gladwell's, talking to humans. Like, how do you actually go behind, your computer or your operations van and go talk to these power users?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a GDPR compliant way to look in your database, but I mean, yeah, there are mechanisms in kind of like having awards for like writer minutes for doing kind of like deep interviews, that sort of thing. Or just talking to people on the street on kind of like who recommended this service to you, uh, how many minutes would they be able to like be willing to get for an hour of conversation so that you kind of have a trade. But yeah, it's a really good question. I don't think there's like one straight answer, but I think it involves kind of giving up some free minutes and taking some time to just spend time with them, seeing how they ride, where they want to go, where are they riding the most, and kind of what's important for them when they recommend the service to other users.
Yeah, well, I'd say on the GDPR piece, it's definitely a lot easier to engage with surveys or direct emails here in North America because we don't have that constraint. Though I will say, in kind of my time, I always appreciate in person, face to face feedback more than any kind
Yeah.
of digital or kind of written response. So one of my favorite things, and especially in new markets. And even in maturing markets was, go find our best hubs, corrals, parking bays, and just sit out there. And then when you saw people riding or unlocking, just go talk to them and just literally take handwritten notes or get a clipboard out there. Just take that and start digesting it in mass. That is subjective data that you can kind of start quantifying. But and yeah, like you say, people, it's amazing what kind of insights you can get from just asking people directly why they do something and how you can maybe change or influence their opinions. So I would agree with that. I got one more big kind of topical question, but I want to have a little reminder. Everyone from the audience, we're going to jump into some Q&A in about 7-8 minutes. So if you haven't submitted questions already, definitely queue those up, and we definitely want to get to those before the hour's out. So kind of final topic, back to taking pricing to another level. We're all very acquainted with dynamic pricing in the sense of Uber and surge pricing from back in the day. It's, I think, kind of ubiquitous with the market equilibrium of kind of this mobility world we live in. But we haven't really seen that in shared micromobility. I know Bolt, Estonian Bolt, recently announced they were going to be doing some kind of dynamic pricing going forward. And there's been a few stabs here and there that you can read about in the news, but there's not really an SOP for that. And I know companies like Zoba have products out there that can kind of help with this or get people thinking about this at the very least before they implement. I'd really, really love to think from kind of a user perspective, as well as kind of your kind of professional opinions, what you think kind of the pros and cons of any kind of truly incentivized or dynamic surge kind of pricing models or automations really are, and kind of what operators should do about this kind of changing landscape. Whoever wants to take it first.
Yeah, I can hop in here. I think it's a question we field often, and I think something that has like a lot of potential for continued exploration. I don't know if there's any kind of one answer yet. I think that in certain aspects we can see like there is some dynamic pricing that happens today, right? With parking fees or just things that encourage good behavior, safe riding, X, Y, and Z. I think those are all forms of dynamic pricing, and I think what dynamic pricing is the goal of it, right, is to shape user behavior, right? That's certainly the case for the big for Uber, right? It's communicating, hey, it's busy right now, and you're going to have to pay a little bit more for it. You tend to know when prices are higher, when there's surges, X, Y, and Z. I think that there probably are ways that you could incorporate dynamic pricing within a shared mobility service. It might be you can imagine incentivizing power users, right, to build their habits, right? Hey, we have vehicles in your area. Here's a discount. Ride them on your commute. The other one is, hey, you're gonna ride a vehicle to the stadium and then not take it home. Maybe there's an additional parking fee or something along those lines, because it requires quite a bit of operational overhead to then go and clean up the 300 vehicles that get ridden to a game and then never taken away. I think that there are probably some pinch points where dynamic pricing can be really, really helpful. But ultimately probably not huge as far as impacting demand, right? Much more of just making operations sustainable, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know um, if ultimately dynamic pricing for Uber, again, just using that as a proxy, it's so that drivers come online, right? So then you can actually access the service rather than necessarily penalizing you for using the service at a time where a lot of other people want it. So I think if it serves a purpose and you can clearly communicate that and make the justification for it, it's understandable. But if it's just dynamic pricing, it's downtown, it's a holiday weekend, and we're increasing the prices. To a certain extent, users may tolerate that more or less. But I'm really excited as far as continued exploration here. We have some customers working with on items like this. So I think it's an area where we'll see a lot of potential innovation over the coming months and years with the shared services.
Cool. Yeah, I think
Lars?
you're touching on a lot of interesting points there, Charles. And I think like from the operator perspective, like if let's do the kind of like the negative case, like a dynamic discount. I mean, if you're giving a discount to a user that doesn't really realize that there was a discount, they just wanted to get from A to B and they were willing to pay top dollar for it. They just didn't know. They're like, oh, I'm surprised I have a discount. That's kind of what happened with the incentivized parking pilots. And was why kind of cities have gone away from this and operators tend to not recommend it because yeah, it just doesn't necessarily have that much of an effect because users have no clue that, oh yeah, when I park here, I actually get a discount until they actually do. So, but that being said, I think there's yeah, not waste your money on that, but I think there is a case for kind of like if you have an area with very high demand at a given time and your supply is limited from your competitors, you can increase your price. And if I mean, I don't know how to communicate that to users, but for if you know that there's an area with high competition, um, and you have a strong hypothesis that you have certain users that are kind of flipping through apps and checking which service is the cheapest, then you can give a discount for that given area. But I don't think there's been any pilots kind of trying to do it, just that.
Yeah, I think it definitely is in my 2 cents is it's right for kind of exploration. So really excited to see what Zoba's customers kind of put forth and the data starts to show in due time. I agree with you, Lars. There's kind of you can undercut yourself because customers don't know, and then there's going to be customers that also just game the system. They figure it out and they're going to figure out how to game it. I always my favorite model, which I never really got to execute as much because it's a little tricky on kind of the user interface in apps, is incentivized rebalancing. In free floating systems, you don't want to discount these random drop off points that might be off the beaten path for an ops team to rebalance. So how can you incentivize a user to kind of bring that back to a key point of origin or destination for future rides? But again, easier said than done. So I'm excited to kind of see where that kind of goes in the future. I'm going to kind of end it right there because we're about 15 minutes out, and I want to get to a few questions that are rolling in. So again, keep submitting those questions for those that haven't. But one that caught my eye: what impact does seasonality and local events have on pricing decisions, and how can operators adapt their strategies to capitalize on these fluctuations? So whoever wants to take that one.
Yeah, I mean, let's do events. I think if you have supply at an event, the event is coming, you've planned for it, you've hired staff to rebalance to that event. um, users don't, maybe you can, for example, have, you can use it as a tool to win new customers, for example. Using hangers or something on the scooter to just show that you have a campaign. But generally just having supply at events is often just as good to both get new users and retain old.
What about for the seasonality? This is something that I always struggled with, and I think most do, kind of this time of year when it's depending on where you are and on the world, it could be getting kind of cold or still the lingering effects of summer and early mid fall. It's usually this period where people are starting to winterize or put their fleets in warehouses, but you still have maybe a service contract that you're supposed to keep a fleet out, and so you almost kind of go into maybe October, November thinking I'm going to lose some money this month, just because of the operational cost to keep that going. Is there any kind of pricing strategies or any kind of things you can maybe discount just to juice up those rides, do you think, during this period so you can break even or maybe still make a little bit of profit before you kind of close shop for the winter?
I just on the point of, we've kind of touched on it before, like convenience user behavior. I think that the users who are riding in the winter are going to be the users who know the service and have made a decision that they are going to ride in the winter. So I don't think that, there's two ways you can move pricing, right? You can move it up or you can move it down. I don't think moving it down is going to meaningfully entice people to come onto the service because it's cold, right? Again, it's kind of a binary choice. It's probably the first choice you make well above the pricing preference is just, am I going to bundle today to go out and kind of take a scooter to my coffee shop, the grocery store, to work, whatever have you, versus the bus, versus driving my own car, X, Y, and Z. So it's kind of the first decision is, do I want to use a shared service when it's cold out, which pricing is not going to meaningfully impact, right? Just in that user preference. So I think that, the decreasing pricing to bring people online, probably not a viable strategy. But if those people are still going to ride it, and they want access to your service, and your service costs more to maintain because there's lower utilization, and you're, otherwise losing money, it may make sense to kind of raise prices in the winter or something along those lines. Again, like you have a little bit more of a probably captive user base, i.e., again, people who want to use your service and are kind of going, fighting the elements to do so, braving the elements to do so, which probably points to higher aptitude to pay, again, to access that service.
Okay. It's a tricky one. I don't think there's a perfect best practice out there. And yeah, I think it's definitely cultural. I'll say my experiences in Minneapolis, Minnesota, they'll ride short weather and negative, 20 degrees in January. So whereas, 50 degrees warmer than that in the South, people will still act like it's too cold. So it just it really just depends on kind of the culture and kind of how people approach the service. Got another question here. It says 3 pricing tricks, measures, innovations, and shared micromobility that you really liked in the last 12 months. I don't know if there's 3, so I'll just kind of leave it open-ended as kind of as what kind of maybe pricing tricks, measures, and innovations in the last year.
I think a recent headline that was really interesting was Bolt, Estonian Bolt, testing out pricing by distance instead of pricing by time, so kind of a per distance fee versus a per minute fee, with the explicit goal of encouraging safer riding. And I think that, again, that to a certain extent is a way to simplify pricing for a user, because, again, if you're doing it by distance, you could price similarly across e-bikes and e-scooters, because, again, we know that e-bikes tend to just take longer rides. So and they do that, but they do that faster. So in one sense, there's some other small small things that, pricing by distance could streamline. It's certainly a little bit more difficult. I think how do you calculate distance? Obviously, depends on your scooter hardware, your vehicle hardware, being able to track that, and then how you want to calculate it. But I do think that is a really cool one and interesting, and I think a small change, but again, something that might just make things clearer for users so that they have a better understanding of how to price a trip within their head.
Anything that you're seeing, Lars?
Yeah, I mean, from serving public clients, I love often kind of the kind of like pricing the results in public-private partnerships. I mean, this is probably like listening to someone from a very exotic country for you guys in the States, but for example, this PTA in Stavanger that has the e-bike included in their monthly public transit pass. So it's really, really popular. And then you've capped the minutes per trip you can take up to 15. So it's kind of like a traditional bike share pricing model.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that. And I mean, just generally other kind of like pricing innovations. There's one PTA I know of that did discount on the public transit ticket for taking a micromobility ride, which is pretty sick. So yeah, I think that's kind of my personal favorites.
Yeah, no, it's tricky. I think some of the ones I've seen and they're still kind of being piloted are in large metro areas that have robust metro systems, and it's all about tying these systems together. And I think
Yeah.
some of the mobility as a service aggregators that are trying to have all these trips within one ecosystem are starting to kind of experiment and look at how we can leverage discounts for one modality by using another. And so I think, taking, say subway power users and trying to get them to maybe use more e-bikes or scooters to alleviate, congestion on a subway, and pricing incentives there, I think is, those are things that are starting to maybe pop up in certain pilots. So yeah, it's I'd say it's hard to say that there point to one or two or three that are like really clear-cut answers, but a lot of people are experimenting with stuff right now. I kind of want to go back to Charles's point because while you were talking, we had a question come in on Bolt's pricing structure, and so I kind of want to use the tail end of that because they definitely wanted to know what kind of impacts this would have. But specifically, part of this was, will this have an effect on safety? Because of will users take this as a trigger to say, hey, I'm not going to try to go through a red light or beat traffic, and I'm going to actually, because it's distance, not time, I'm going to be a little bit more conscious of my own personal safety and others. Do you think that's going to actually be a positive effect of this, or an effect at all?
I am no safety expert, so I don't want to speak too highly credentialed on this topic. As a user, I think that, if someone was to say, hey, right, we're trying to, incentivize you to be safe, that's a good sign for me to understand, okay, well, I can, take my time a little bit. But again, a lot of it comes down to convenience and, the question of, do people cross the street when it's red? And like in some societies they don't, but in a lot of they still do, right? Those I'm known to jaywalk at times, so I'm probably still gonna go through red lights on a scooter at times, regardless if they're charging me for time or distance. But I certainly hope it does have some positive effect. But I don't know if that alone is going to be a mechanism to really rein in some of the worst user behaviors.
Yeah, I don't think I can attest to the kind of the safety issues, but like looking at it as just an operator tool, I think it's a good tender winning tool. And I don't think it necessarily has an adverse effect on costs, depending on how you calculate it. If you calculate because if you go at a lower speed, you use less battery as well. So I think that's a good thing.
No, I'd
Yeah.
agree. I'd say in my experiences and mostly the operating in the U.S. Southeast and a lot of university towns, I've asked this question on like how users treat the timing, and a lot of the college kids would say they don't care how long they're on it. That's for one, half the time they're not even paying. It's their parents' credit cards on there, so they really don't care about the timing aspect of it. So their answer would be this means nothing. But I've talked to people and when I go to Europe and even in Brussels, I've asked some people last time I was there, what did why are you using this moped the way I've seen reckless driving, and I've seen people, renting bikes and e-bikes from the train depots, and it is a conscious thing because the customers are maybe a little more price sensitive, and so I think if this does, if this triggers a mental thing of, oh, I can save a few dollars, few euros, few pounds, then maybe I won't try to rush it, or I won't try to speed through that I had been doing. So yeah, I think time will tell. I'd love to see the data on there. We have a few minutes left, so I kind of want to end the Q&A here, and turn it back to kind of Charles and Lars. I appreciate you guys, jumping on and having this fun discussion. If you could tell the audience kind of where they can follow you and your companies, and any kind of fun projects you guys have coming on that they should follow. I'll kind of let you kick it off, Charles. Where can everyone follow you at Zoba?
Yeah, best bet is going to be zoba.com, and our Medium blog, where we post a fair bit of kind of technical content. Want to plug that. We have a lot of really interesting ones. I would call out kind of our blogs on cannibalization, and how we think about rider, kind of rider demand in the market. We talked a lot earlier today about kind of convenience, and I think again, we really believe that riders are going to use the service when it is available for them, when and where they need it. Seems very clear, but there's a lot of untapped demand in really every market we've ever worked in. So would certainly encourage everyone to visit our website, check out our blog. We've got some great content there, and follow along as we continue to kind of innovate and push our optimization engine and technology forward.
And Lars, if anyone needs any high-end consulting, where can they find you at Movability? What's the best place to reach you at?
Either on LinkedIn, just type in my name, my strange last name with the O with the line through it. It's if anyone can pronounce that. But also movability.io. So yeah, let's have a coffee.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I want to thank you both again for joining us, and for the audience. This was recorded, so if any of your colleagues wish to have seen this but couldn't make it, we'll be pushing this out in the next couple of days. So be on the lookout. And stay tuned for future Joyride webinar series topics. This is a blast. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining, and thanks for everyone for signing up and watching us for an hour. Appreciate it.